Now, Dan McDonnell joins us. I'm going to read out Dan's tweet from Full Time, which is a bit sobering and put everything into context afterwards. Great night for the League of Ireland clubs. The wins should be used as ammunition for improvement. Thoughts immediately now turn to whether there'll be suitable stadiums for the third round. New generation of players and managers deserve better. Dan is with us now. Dan, how are you getting on this morning?
Morning, how are things?
It is an obvious question. I mean, we've been chatting to the Sligo lads about it all morning. They would love the game to be at the showgrounds, but realistically, it's going to be incredibly difficult to do so. In all likelihood, they're probably going to have to go to Dublin because the club had already gone to speak to UEFA. We're told the temporary seating couldn't go in, so it makes it very difficult to meet the requirements to be able to host Viking in a couple of weeks' time. That's for the clubs logistically to work out over the next couple of weeks, but having to give away home advantage would be quite a disappointment for Sligo particularly.
Yeah, and like this is the point. I mean, there's obviously great sort of euphoria with the results last night, but you know, I sort of remember maybe a decade ago or so, you know, St. Pat's getting through a couple of rounds and having to move to Tala, and like this has happened in a couple of instances in our time. Obviously, the Dundalk games I think you referenced earlier, and it's a consistent issue here, and I think, you know, sometimes it's obviously a constant cry for oxygen and exposure. And when the sort of news cycle turns around in your direction, it is the opportunity to make that point and to keep driving home that argument, because it was always a big frustration for people in Dundalk that, you know, they had these great European nights, and in theory, like, these great European teams should have been coming to their town and to their locality. And you know, they weren't. Like that business was going to Tala, and it may well be that Sligo Rovers end up in a similar situation, as much as they haven't given up hope. But the time is not on their side, and there's a lot of issues not on their side. So that's this is the frustration here, because you know, I think people would acknowledge that the product is better. In saying that, like, there's a lot more to do there too, and you can't let a couple of results sort of make you think that everything is fine either. I think that's not the sort of the constructive response to it, as much as you have to enjoy it. But I think, I mean, the broader issue, and I do think people are aware of this in positions of authority, and this is the result of sort of years of neglect. But the facilities and the platforms and the stages need to be better, because I actually think the product will be better when you can almost give these clubs a little bit more of an arena to show what they can do. So it is a point you have to make in the midst of any sort of celebration.
Dan, hold that thought for a second. We're going to just sort out a few rocking up and down camera issues with Dan at the moment. I was wondering if we were in a boat there.
Yeah.
But that is a key point, though, Ash, which we'll pick up with Dan in a moment, which is that if clubs particularly are able to get the finances in, or if maybe work can be done with local councils to try and arrange ways of upgrading stadia, that is one way for the League of Ireland to kick themselves to another level here.
Big time, because even some of these teams that are travelling over here, you know, that they're seeing the stadiums and the dressing rooms, the facilities, they're not up to scratch. It's you know, it's not a secret. We know that. So, you know, even that side of things, it spur you on. This is a small time league club that we're going to play. Like, when it's not the case, a lot of the times, look, we've seen the results. So yeah, big time. I think there's a lot of improvements that need to be done, as Dan said. And now I suppose we're in a situation where you can't fill the you can fill the stadiums 2-3 times over, probably, with the amount of fans that want to come now.
You were on the press conference about Dalymount yesterday with Daniel Lambert in the studio a bit earlier this week too, and he was making the point that there's actually a very good way of investing public money here in a product that is very important, and developing players and developing clubs within communities. Obviously he's talking primarily about Dalymount, but they were talking about that yesterday as well. Yeah,
it's a knock-on effect throughout the whole club, throughout the whole town. You know, if you see a stadium that's there, kids see it, you know, it drives the whole thing on. He was speaking a lot about having a terrace, that could be a really big advantage. A lot of football fans want to stand when they come to games, so that was something they're hoping to bring in. At the moment they're still waiting to hear. I think it's September 4th when they really get the confirmation, so we're waiting to hear there, but it's positive news for Bows in that sense.
Yeah, it's a slight tangent, Dan. It's not getting away from the European issue, but it is kind of related to it as well. It would seem for Bows and for Dalymount at this stage that it's looking at a redevelopment as opposed to maybe those shiny designs that we saw last year of what would have been effectively a knockdown and rebuild.
Yeah, no, I think it's not a tangent, because it's sort of relevant to the broader debate, as you mentioned. I mean, Bows played in the Aviva last year. There was obviously an element of but they were great events as it happened, and they used home advantage. But again, you know, they had great nights that they weren't able to play. in their base. But yeah, it does appear to be that way. I don't know. Like, I just get frustrated by this stuff because it's so slow. I mean, Daily Mount was meant to be a Euro 2020 legacy project. It's such an Irish football tale. I mean, Euro 2020 didn't even end up coming here in the end either, for sort of different reasons. But yeah, like, you sort of get to the stage where you believe it when you see it with some of it, without needing to be too world weary about it. But it does appear like perhaps on paper it's a little bit more realistic. This plan that is being proposed. I mean, I think there is a sort of a degree of self-awareness that there is a quite high spend of sort of public money on this project. So you obviously have to be, it has to be appropriate level of spending, I suppose. But I suppose the flip side of that is, I mean, you know, there's obviously been significant public spending in Cala, but look at what that facility has brought to the area and surrounds, not just for, say, one League of Ireland club, but under 21 games, the Senior Women's Internationals, the Finland game, which is sold out now, and other sports have actually been able to use that facility as well too. And I think, you know, this broader point, like, I've travelled around Europe covering League of Ireland clubs, and it just drives you mad, like, sort of seeing the facilities, and particularly you could go to Scandinavia. I'm you know, the Nordic region. I'm sure maybe Sligo Rovers might even experience it next week. Like, you go there and there's these massive sort of municipal facilities which are shared by all sports, by all codes, like several versions of that sort of dome that Connacht GAA have, but it's one that's used by multiple sports, multiple disciplines.
Was it Luxembourg, Dan, who had that really nice about 10,000 seater that Ireland played in as well?
Yeah, like this is it. You don't need, like, we're not talking about sort of big white elephant sort of 30,000 seater venues or something like that. It's more purpose-built, smaller arenas, which look like, you know, there's people in position now who are probably inheriting a lot of problems. And, you know, I would make the point that, like, Irish football boomed in the golden eras, you know, of Jack Charlton, where every politician wanted to be pictured, you know, around a football event, around a match, around something. And that was really the time that you possibly could have driven the stadium argument. And for whatever reason, people weren't thinking that way. It was very much eyes on the prize, the tunnel vision of the senior team, and that was it. So you're sort of playing catch up now, and that's frustrating. But this is why, like, these results, these games, you have to use that to drive the broader argument.
Now, in terms of what happened on the pitch, you were at the showgrounds last night. Rockin played really well, beat Motherwell over 2 legs. We've been chatting about throughout the show. Look, they go with probably hope more than expectation to play against Viking in Norway next week. But for Sligo particularly, like, it's not that long ago, Dan, that I remember they had the fundraising boxes out to try and get money into the club. And now here they are with the best part of £1 million coming in over this run in Europe now. Yeah,
I mean, listen, I walked into the ground last night, Will, and, you know, the first thing, I was met by someone I know on the club's board who handed me a leaflet, you know, about sort of getting the message out that, you know, they're looking to recruit more members, you know, because it's a member-owned club. They have a certain amount of owners and they're looking for more. They would make the point that they don't have sort of a benefactor or sort of a sugar daddy who's able to maybe at the end of the year meet any shortfall. I mean, you know, pretty much what they earn, they have to try and put back into the club. And like, that is, you know, that is the sort of the romance of the story, but it's the ongoing struggle of the story as well too, that, like, this money really does matter to them. Like, you look at the Sligo Rovers' broader plan, like, they want to improve their facilities, their training ground. There's no doubt, like, they can make a strong argument for the benefits of what they bring to the community, because in recent years they've sort of improved their academy, and there's sort of kids from all around the region involved. Like, there's Niall Morahan last night from Leitrim, it was Caelan Barlow, another local. There's people from Mayo involved, players from Mayo involved, sprinkled in around with some sort of you know, outside overseas recruits. So there is sort of you know, there's a broader story to what they're doing there. And while, yes, like, it may well be that the next round is a bridge too far, although it's a little bit of a free hit for them, so you never know. I think the value of what they've done this year will stand to them in the long run either way.
You were very impressed by Caelan Barlow as well, Dan.
Yeah, no, like, he's I didn't know too much about him, to be honest, and I was only chatting to Conor O'Grady, who's the head of the academy, afterwards about him, and he was like, no, I mean, this isn't a surprise to us. And this is the thing, like, they have, I mean, in the last year they had Johnny Kenny, who went to Celtic, Basically, he came through, had one season, he was gone. Ed McGinty gone to Oxford. John Matten's gone to St Johnstone. It's what you have to do. I know you've had discussions on the show this week about sort of the exodus of players and getting the right value for players, and that's obviously a debate that will continue. But there is no doubt that through the sort of the national underage leagues and some of the changes in recent years, the Brexit point that's obviously been well documented, we are seeing more exciting young players coming through into the league. The flip side of that is you may not see them for too long, but they are there, and that is encouraging.
Yeah, it's frustrating. You almost want to keep some of them under wraps if you possibly can, and putting them on TV against Motherwell, where sides in the UK may well have seen them because on Premier Sports, then you could easily lose them if they have a very good game. But that is the nature, unfortunately, of the League of Ireland. And I suppose the thing is, Dan, I was listening to the debate around it that Nathan was having last night. The killer is that for agents, they're going to want to put in these low release clauses which will see players leave, and League of Ireland clubs who've had to develop these players along the way don't necessarily get a very nice cut of the transfer deal. It's like we hear about the Matt Dohertys, we hear about the Gavin Bazunu deals being quite good for Shamrock Rovers, but they are very few and far between when the deal is that lucrative for the League of Ireland team.
Yeah, no, and I listened to Pat Dean, who was on last night, and I mean there's definitely there's two sides to this argument. Again, there can be no arguing with the fact that it's completely understandable why these players will go and pursue the opportunities that are offered to them. They're going to earn better money. They are going to a sort of a bigger shop window over there. I think everyone, or most people within the game here, sort of understand that. But in saying that too, there's definitely a perception of Ireland as a sort of a bargain basement operation that is definitely fueled and allows sort of agents, I think, to really drive home the clauses and to say, our player will not sign for your club unless you give this clause. And they hold a lot of power. And I think, sometimes people talk about massive, thinking that we're expecting sort of, $500,000 for every player or something like that. I don't think that's the case. But in saying that, good players going for 30 grand is ridiculous. It's absolutely preposterous. But again, that comes back to the broader point that people from overseas come to our league. They see stadiums that are sort of substandard, a lot of inadequacies here, and that probably strengthens the argument for saying, well, why would we pay money here? A lot of the coaches at this club are volunteers. They're not even paid coaches, and they can construct all sorts of arguments to justify the bargain basement prices. What you probably hope is that the 7 or 8 who've done well this year almost become flag bearers if they do very well. Well, then of course it's easier to look for more next time. But there's two sides to the argument, and I think everyone will spin it in their direction very favourably, including agents.
And last night, what a night it was for the League of Ireland. It really highlighted it, and it's really put the story out there, and people are actually, I suppose, noticing and seeing what League of Ireland teams can do.
Yeah, no, it's true, actually. And I think, for me, I'm obviously working the beat the whole year round, but the best time is always these European games. As much as sort of one-off results can be very deceiving in both directions, there can be a knee-jerk reaction if they're bad. There can probably be an overreaction when they're good, to be honest. But I think, you have to sort of find your place in the calendar. I know, Will, you were tweeting about this week, and I know the gap in the inter-county season is obviously a contentious one, and it's not a case there's multi-sport fans everywhere who can like all sports. But I think it is true that you do have this month of August now where there isn't a huge amount in terms of major Irish-based sporting news stories. And for me, there's a sense of, okay, wouldn't it be great if this was the time of the year where maybe people got engaged with these sort of European matches a bit more? And also, and Conan touched on it there, our clubs don't always make it as far as August, but when they do, if you can make them bigger events and sort of give these events a little bit of momentum and exposure, because they're really interesting games, and in other countries, they're often bigger news than they are here. I mean, you can watch some of the games this week on TV in other countries, but you can't watch it here. And I know the reasons for that. And it's not a case of just having to go at broadcasters, because they have valid points they can raise too. But I think you have to get to the stage where the interest is such that the broadcasters have no option.
I, by the way, didn't want to admit to Conan earlier on, but our WhatsApp group here in the office watched a Slovenian stream of the penalties with St. Pat's last night because we were able to find one. But that is the bizarre thing, Dan, and in some ways it's like the Father Ted quote, maybe I like the misery. There is something about being a League of Ireland fan and having to find some obscure stream somewhere to watch a game that almost adds to the enjoyment of it. I remember sitting with Shane Keegan in this office a few years ago when it was the middle of the pandemic. I think we watched the derby between Bows and Rovers, and it was someone with like one of those Kitman cameras that had linked it into his laptop, and we were watching it behind closed doors. Like you almost have to go the extra step for the League of Ireland, which adds to the enjoyment a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I should contractually say in some way. I mean, it was available on LOI TV. I mean, people just have a mental block about paying for like journalistic or subscriber content. When they pay it on a coffee or a pint without thinking about it. So that is the thing. But it is, look, I know exactly what you're saying. Like I think the Sheriff Dundalk game a couple of years ago, which was a penalty shootout, it somehow ended up being streamed on YouTube by some.
It was literally a guy in a phone.
Yeah, I think I ended up like you could hook it through YouTube through casting or whatever. But I see your point about people sort of revel in that misery to some degree, but I also hate that too. Like, I mean, it should be, as I said, you're in Tala the other night. There's like the Bulgarian Tony O'Donoghue or whatever is doing like a pitch side report during the game. Like, this game has been digested. Like, they probably covered their Champions League teams there, like we might cover, say, Leinster or sort of Munster here. These are big sort of events, and yet sometimes here you're sort of struggling for any mention at all. And it can sort of, it can sort of, it can lead to a sort of an angry complex then building up in people screaming for that coverage, which sort of creates a sort of a cycle of anger around what should be a sort of an enjoyable time. So like that's the, that is the sort of the slight dysfunction that is sort of cemented here.
I think some people, Dan, assumed that Rovers were just going to be on the TV on Tuesday because the previous round had been shown. And I appreciate that, like, RT were somewhat caught up because they were committed to showing all of the games at the Women's European Championship. So you had England and Sweden on the same night. But you would have thought we'd go on to news now, or we're getting to a point where maybe alternatives should be available in those circumstances. Like, our champions should really be available to watch in every round of Europe.
Listen, I think so. I think RTB did flag that some way out. And I think sometimes they do absorb a lot of the grief, and there obviously are other broadcasters who could step in. And again, I'm not ignorant to the facts that like some of those would have commercial concerns. And as well, I would make this point too, that when our teams win, obviously you sort of bang the drum about it, but you have to be prepared to sort of ship some losses too, and the discourse and the debate that comes with that. And at times, there's been some bad performances that people are probably been happy weren't on TV. But I think you have to get to the stage where these are sort of, as I said, sort of an ingrained part of the calendar, that they are on the box in some shape or form. I don't think it's really possible to do it because of individual rights issues, but I'd love to see it structured into the TV deal in some way, that these games almost, they have to be shown. But I know that that's probably a hard thing to enforce and sort of slot into the deal that's there at the moment. But I think there has to be more inventive ways at times, or it has to be more imaginative ways to get these games broadcast to a wider audience. Like, it's not as if there was a huge amount else going on last night, but again, were people optimistic about those clubs going through? Were they screaming beforehand that all these games should be on? Some people were. Everyone else is latching onto it a little bit in the aftermath. But I think it's the perennial question. But maybe next year we say that. Like last year, we had the same level of success. That in the sense of the clubs that got to the third round, the volume of clubs that got to the third round. So the hope, I suppose, is that this becomes more regular. And if it's not just every so often. If it starts to happen on a regular basis, then that argument sort of makes itself.
I just want to let you go, Dan. Conan's stake was going to be very difficult for Sligo and Pats to go through against Viking and against CSKA Sofia particularly. Are we hopeful though that Shamrock Rovers, especially what we saw in that second leg against Ludogorets, that Shamrock Rovers might be able to get to the group stages?
Yeah, I think that's realistic. The champions, Shamrock Rovers, even if they lose their next tie against the champions of Macedonia, they get another go to get into the Conference League, whereas sort of Sligo or Pats do or die in every round. So Shamrock Rovers play the champions of Macedonia, Shkupi, who are decent. They pushed Dynamo Zagreb close, but I have to say, like, it's a lower ranked league. there comes a point where if you want to make that next step, it's one thing to lose to Ludogorets and look at them and go, we can't compete. They have a wage bill of X amount. They pay this amount for a player. That's perfectly understandable and reasonable. It's harder to sell that point if you lose to the champions of Macedonia or Estonia, as it was last year. I think if Rovers play as well as they can wrap up group stage football with a round to spare. But that's the sort of the bridge they have to cross now.
Dan, cheers for joining us on OTB AM.
Thank you.